Hi there, how's it going? Listen, I'm gonna do a video response, sort of slowly easing myself back into this whole making videos on a relatively regular basis thing. And I was watching Rolling for Initiative, which is a YouTube show, and Alexis, who's the host of that show, and I recommend you check it out. It's a fun show. She made a post about cities and how it's a there's some bouncing around here. There's a little rambling to getting you there, but basically it boils down to she was talking about how cities are awesome as a setting for D&D, and I agree absolutely. I am a fan of cities as a setting. Now you're thinking, as she stated, it's not cities and dragons, it's Dungeons and Dragons. But few things in favor of cities. One, cities are like small pictures of entire continents. And what I mean by that is you can pull all the different cultures relatively easily into one spot. If you look at classic stories of real world cities, you hear about the sort of ethnic neighborhoods involved. Little Italy, Chinatown. These are evocative places that you can sort of picture a small little cultural alcove inside a greater urban environment. So that's one reason for doing a city, is to give yourself a convenient use for all the various cultures in the world that you're running in. Truly metropolitan cities, really massive cities like a Rome or London. New York is a modern example. San Francisco, Singapore to a certain extent. Have all kinds of cultures, all kinds of travel going in and out of them, and you have all the adventure hooks you could want. In a fantasy setting, you just do the same thing, like a Waterdeep or something like that. These are, great ways of pulling lots of the things that are in the world into one location, rather than sending the players jaunting across the world. There's nothing wrong with jaunting across the world. Tolkien does quite a bit with this. But you don't have to do it. You can bring the world to them if they're in the right location. And the city is often the right location. 2, geometry. What I mean by this is cities are sort of grow over time. Sometimes they're planned, sometimes they're not. But they have a unique relationship with geometry that you don't see in the out in the normal world in a lot of ways. You have a verticality to them. Sharn is an excellent example of this in Eberron, where it's multiple layers up. It's a city that's built up rather than wide. And so you can have, a fight at one point and you fall down to another layer in the city. Or, you can talk about the various aspects of the society by where on the levels they are. The higher they are, the higher class they are. The richer they are, the wealthier. You have narrow angles and corners. You have ways of confining things that are just like a dungeon, but in a place where ordinary people wander. You have so much space that you can play with that it makes for an interesting setting in and of itself, just for any kind of combat encounter or something. 3, cities are filled with mysteries and legends. Real world example. Everybody has heard of the gators that live in the undergrounds of New York City. People release, buy a croc or a gator thinking they'll make a good pet, and just lose track of it, and he ends up down in the sewers. It's a classic story. We've all heard it. There are rivers that used to run through London that don't exist anymore. There are lost subway stations. And these are real world things. Now, in a fantasy setting, who knows what could be lost underneath the city? Maybe there was an old temple there that got buried in an earthquake and they just built over the top of it. But still inside there are dangerous things in the temple. I mean, you can picture all kinds of wonderful things here. One of the classic stories about King Arthur is rather about Merlin. And he was advising a king about building a castle that keeps falling down. The reason it kept falling down is because there were two dragons underneath the ground and they were fighting. Now, I really kind of dug that story, but imagine if there were two dragons asleep under your city. Now, imagine an adventure between where the opponent is these dragon cultists who want to wake the dragons. And you, the adventurers, want to keep the dragons asleep because, well, people live in this city and you don't want them all to die. But you wouldn't mind getting hold of that dragon treasure, would you? These are things that you could put in a city and it works perfectly. It makes for a great setting. This is not even to begin talking about the wonderful joy that is a thieves' guild. You get so much fodder out of a thieves' guild. They can be opponents, they can be allies, different thieves' guilds can be competing against one another. How do they compete? Mob wars in the real world make for really interesting drama. There have been plenty of movies about them. Imagine one in Waterdeep or Luskin or what have you. Any of the fantasy cities you could name, there'll be thieves. And thieves form groups. Thieves' wars, when you have magic and arcane powers and monsters that hide in the shadows as servants. This is good drama. You can have so much fun with this. And then at the end of the day, you don't have to travel very far. You go to an inn and have yourself an ale. I am a fan of cities as settings. They are probably I'm more fond of those than dungeons. That's my opinion. I thought I'd do a bit of a video response on this subject and expand upon it. You should look at cities. You should look at cities as excellent sources of story. And look at modern cities to give you some inspiration. Anyway, this has been my video response. Subscribe, like, share. Go to the Patreon if you want to, or not. I'm not going to pressure you. No pressure. I'm not really a pressure guy. It's not my thing. I'm not really a pressure guy. You know what I mean. Anyway, yeah. Night.